The Hunger Habit by Judson Brewer. Why we eat when we're not hungry and how to stop. As someone who struggled with binge eating and overeating, and now as a psychotherapist who helps other people heal their relationship with food, when this book came out earlier this year, it piqued my interest. Author Judson Brewer was popping up on all the podcasts everywhere, and there seemed to be a lot of interest in the concepts that he puts forward in the book. The premise of the book is that we develop habit loops around food, and we might experience these as cravings, but the idea is that these are automatic patterns where our brain assumes that something is going to be rewarding, so it keeps prompting us to go through that behavior, regardless of what the outcome actually is. The idea offered in this book is that we can break this habit loop with awareness, and that willpower against habits is often the hardest way to break a habit. And the habit loop consists of three parts. There's the trigger, there's the behavior, and then there's the reward. Now, a trigger could be a feeling. A trigger could be, I feel lonely. So the behavior is then I eat, and then the reward or the outcome is then how you feel afterwards. Or it could be as benign as a time of day. The trigger is, it's 11 a.m. and it's my break at work. The behavior is, I eat, I reach for sweet treats that are in the office, and then the result or the reward is whatever the outcome of that is for you. And the idea is that we start paying attention to our own experiences and letting our own experiences be what informs us. He talks about different parts of the brain in the book, which I think is often very appealing. We all want to understand our brains better. And in particular, the orbital frontal cortex gets mentioned time and time again, which Judson Brewer refers to as the deciding part of the brain. This is the part of brain that can update information, particularly when it comes to reward-based information. Because ultimately the book is based on the premise that we learn through positive and negative reinforcement, and that our brain keeps predicting how rewarding we're going to find a particular behavior or course of action. So it draws on the Rescorla-Wagner model, which talks about how we can update our preferences. So in the case of this book, we're talking about food. And in order to update our programming, if you like, around food, is that we need to understand where we are making prediction errors. So it talks about positive prediction errors and negative prediction errors. So a positive prediction error is when the reward is even greater than you thought it was going to be. Let's say you try a new food that you're uncertain about, and oh my goodness, it's delicious. Your orbital frontal cortex will then assign a high reward value to that food. And then a negative prediction error. So 20 years ago in Parsons Green in London, I tried cinnamon ice cream for the first time, and I thought it was incredible. And I didn't see it again for years. And then when I saw it again, I tried it something like 10 years later, and I was so excited. And it was nice, but it was nothing like the first time I had cinnamon ice cream. So that was a negative prediction error. It didn't live up to my expectations. So anytime when we are anticipating or planning, we either find that the experience or the thing that we plan and then do, it either meets our expectation, it exceeds our expectations, or it's below our expectations. Now here's an assumption that runs throughout the whole book. The assumption is that if you pay attention, you will get more negative prediction errors. That is, you will find out that the foods or the quantities or the ways or the times that you're eating these foods is actually not as good as you think it is. It assumes that our bodies will turn away from processed foods and move more towards, he says at the beginning of the book that he doesn't talk about foods as good or bad. He says helpful or unhelpful, but then he never talks about them as helpful or unhelpful going forward. He tends to talk about them as healthy or unhealthy. And that's part of, one of my niggles with this book, I think, is that there is a bit of moralization around food, even though it continues to emphasize that your own experiences should dictate kind of how you navigate and how you make your food choices. So the awareness piece is key. He does go on about it's not about willpower, and I like that. He also stresses that awareness has to be paired with experience in order for change to happen. And that's crucial as well. If you're hoping that you're going to read this book and it's going to change your relationship with food, that's not going to happen. This is a book that would need to be studied if you think it's a book that's going to help you. talks a lot about how disconnected we are from our bodies and how challenging so many of us find it is to even know when we're hungry, to know what we want to eat, to know how much to eat. And so he emphasizes that listening to the body. One of the exercises in the book is to spend a whole day listening and noticing how you ignore what your body is telling you. So you might notice that you're staying up later even though you're feeling tired. That's one way we might ignore our bodies. Or maybe we avoid going to the bathroom because we're focused on whatever it is that we're doing, and we don't get up and go to the bathroom until it gets uncomfortable. Or when we pause and check in with our bodies, we actually notice that we've been feeling a bit thirsty all day and we just haven't been paying attention. We ignore that. And so by intentionally listening, intentionally, repeatedly tuning into the body, we start to learn. We start to learn in a more intuitive way rather than it all going up here and us figuring it out in our heads. The book seems to imply that if we eat out of habit and if we eat when we're not hungry, we're reinforcing something that isn't helpful for us. So there is a bit of a sense of eat when you're hungry, which, yes, of course, eat when you're hungry, but it felt a little bit like only eat when you're hungry when I was reading it. But that just might be how it felt to me, because he doesn't explicitly say that. He has something called the hunger test here, where I'll show you. The idea is that you check in with yourself, and you can check in with, hopefully that's in focus, you can check in with how you're feeling, and then compare that to whether this is likely to be coming from an emotion or stress place, whether it's habit or whether it's hunger. And as you can see, some of them, like a headache, for example, could be stress and emotions, and it can be hunger as well. Here's my niggle with this. Anything that gets people to check in and be asking themselves these things, is a great tool. The thing is, the guidelines around it say that you put your X's in the boxes about whether it's stress, an emotion, habit, or hunger, and then you add up your score, and whichever score is the highest, that is likely where the urge to eat is coming from. And here's the problem with that, because stomach growling, rumbling, or gurgling, you feel hungry in your stomach, you can feel it in your stomach, proper stomach hunger, you put an X in that box. But if you happen to be also avoiding something, feeling restless and feeling tense, you're going to score a 3 in stress and emotion. So if somebody is applying this in a very black and white way, they could be ignoring their hunger because there happens to be stress and emotion going on at the same time. And I don't think that is discussed in this book. It might sound like common sense would say, well, that's clearly hunger, so listen to hunger, but I just wish it was acknowledged. One of the main tools in the book is something he calls the craving tool. But really, to me, it sounds more like an awareness tool. So it's paying attention to what it is that you want to eat, why you want to eat it, paying attention while you're eating it and noticing how it feels. And then afterwards checking in with how much did you eat? How does your body feel? How are your emotions and how are your thoughts? It's a checking in before, during and after you eat. And it's very intentional and it will guide you through that. So one of the questions afterwards as an example is check in with your body. How do you physically feel now? And a -10 is awful and a +10 is awesome. And then you do the same, you check in with your emotions and you check in with your thoughts and you score them. And the idea is that the lower the score, the more you start to feel disenchanted with your behavior. He uses this word disenchantment a lot, to become disenchanted with quote unquote unhealthy foods. In fact, he's got a quote and he says here, awareness not only helps you become disenchanted with unhealthy types and amounts of food, but it also helps you become more enchanted with those that serve your health and well-being. You don't have to tell yourself what to eat or to avoid. Your body will do this for you as long as you build your awareness, paying attention to the results. The bonus is that this becomes a virtuous cycle between your body and mind. And perhaps unsurprisingly, mindful eating makes an appearance in this book. And one of the things he does say about mindful eating, which I really appreciated, is that he says mindful eating doesn't have to be slow eating. You can eat quickly and still pay attention. Mindful eating can even be quite retrospective, so maybe you blow through it and you didn't pay attention, but afterwards you can retrospectively go over it and kind of check in. I like that because he's not pushing for this slow mindful eating. It's not like this, he's not emphasizing this, listen to your body and then you'll eat less through mindful eating. And I don't know about you, but there were certainly times when I was struggling with food where mindful eating, or even staying aware and paying attention to what I was eating, would have felt unbearable. I would have felt like I was crawling out of my skin. And so there isn't a lot spoken in this book about how to make yourself feel safe from all the noise in your head. Because if you're someone and you find if you slow down and pay attention, it feels like your brain is shouting at you. It's so stressful that actually it's really hard to stay in your body and you become quite agitated. He has one chapter on what he calls the committee, which is all those voices in your head. And he talks about naming those voices and disidentifying yourself from those voices. And that is like 100% good advice. But it had such little airtime in this book that it left me feeling a little bit unsatisfied about that piece. And it also came up right towards the end of the book, and he set this out like a 21-day program. For me, the first piece of work we often do when we're working on our relationship with food is understanding those voices in our head. And I would think of it as different parts of us. So you might relate to having a rebel, a part that doesn't want to be told what to do, that rebels against the shoulds. And he is trying to address that by saying that there is no shoulds, but there is a direction here, and the direction is to pay attention, as in you need to pay attention. So there's kind of a should in that, is that in order to do this, you should be paying attention. You cannot follow this program or implement some of the things he's suggesting without paying attention. And some people's relationship, I know certainly for me, there was a period of time where my shame was so chronic, I couldn't bear to be with myself for a second. So all this stuff would have been like, yeah, it sounds great in practice, but that's just another thing that I'm not able to do. So I just want to mention that piece if that's something that you relate to. My favourite part of the book is how he talks about curiosity. Because as therapists, we bang on about curiosity. And I see so much how people really can change and learn about themselves when they are curious about themselves. Curiosity kind of shifts that out of this whole, I'm broken and I have to fix myself straight away. And he talks about, he shares this concept, which was originally by Jordan Littman and Paul Sylvia, about two different types of curiosity. And they are deprivation curiosity and interest curiosity. And for me, this was a light bulb moment, because it was one of those things that was like, I kind of knew this, but I'd never heard it put into words like this. And it just makes so much sense to me. And I'm going to read this bit from the book because it explains it better than I can. Deprivation curiosity feels closed down and narrows our focus. Find that information fast. We ignore everything that seems superfluous. We're on a mission, driven to get that piece of information. Interest curiosity opens us up to the experience. We don't feel rushed because we're focused on the process of learning. The joy of discovery feels good by itself. It is intrinsically rewarding because we don't have to get anything to feel its rewards. Deprivation is about destination. When you get that piece of information that you're lacking, you're done. Mission accomplished. Interest is about the journey. Even if you have a specific destination in mind, you're enjoying the process of learning. People are searching on YouTube for answers to this binge eating problem, and of course they're in pain, but it comes from that place of lack, of trying to fill something with the information. And you might have experienced this yourself if you've ever binge watched content about healing your relationship with food or dieting or whatever it might be. It's that whole I need more information compared to that attitude of curiosity and discovery. What can I discover about myself? And each discovery is rewarding and feels good even before the changes have come along. And curiosity can move us away from judgment, especially if we pair it with kindness and compassion. And Judson Brewer talks a lot about self-kindness in this book. And so on the whole, none of the practices or things that he suggests that people do or try, I don't have an issue with any of it. And yet, I feel like there's one bit that really, really does niggle me. And that is to do with the examples that he uses. So throughout the book, he uses examples of people that he has worked with. And he talks about this guy, Jack, in the section where he's talking about slip-ups, when you slip up. And Jack orders a salad in a restaurant, and Jack's noticing as he's ordering the salad, he's filling up and he's full, but he keeps eating even though he's full. And so him and Judson, do this whole analysis of like what was happening at the time and this, that, and the other. And the piece that doesn't even get a look in is maybe the salad didn't have enough energy. It sounds like it could be volume eating. It might not have been, but it's not even acknowledged, so I don't think it's a good example. We can feel full up and our brains can still be genuinely telling us we're hungry because we haven't consumed enough energy. And that piece doesn't get mentioned. Judson, he's quite humble at the beginning of this book, and he says, I haven't struggled with this stuff. I was questioning whether I'm the person to write this book. And if you haven't ever experienced that feeling of I'm full, but I still want to eat, but it's coming from a primal part of the brain, a part of your brain that doesn't believe it's had enough food, that is different, I think, from the kind of craving habits that he's referring to in a lot of the book, but it doesn't get acknowledged. And then, oh my goodness, in the bit where he's talking about cravings, he talks about Jackie, and he's referring to the cravings as a craving monster. So I'm just going to read you this bit where he speaks about Jackie. For our friend Jackie, cravings were less like a sweet inner toddler having a tantrum and more like a raving, craving monster. During the period of her life when Jackie was restricting the type and amounts of food she ate, she would find herself bothered by persistent thoughts like, I could have this or that. Chinese takeout was one of her favourites. Whether it was a reward for meeting a goal, an impulse brought on by a mood, or even something seemingly random, her craving monster stirred whenever she tried to follow the rules she'd set up for herself too rigidly. Feeling like there's no way to win, she'd relent. Defeated, she'd dial her local Chinese restaurant and order disgustingly vast amounts of carbs, fried potatoes and rice noodles with curry dishes. Like screaming children, our craving monster screams, handle me now. You can't ignore it. You can't resist it. You're not going to be able to turn your attention to anything else until you address the craving. But how do you do that without feeding the beast? Then he goes on to talk about the craving monster as a formidable enemy. She was restricting. Like, it couldn't be clearer. She's restricting, and then she's having persistent thoughts about eating all the food she's not allowed to eat. And he's talking about it as a craving that needs to be overcome. That is the bit that grinds my gears. There is nothing in this book about how restriction can lead to out of control eating. It's just missed out completely. So whilst, yes, I think this book offers a lovely way to become more present, more aware, that listening and being and allowing our brains to kind of update our experiences without trying to take on information about what we should and shouldn't eat. There's nothing in there about how we are conditioned to believe how much is the right amount for us and that that's going to get in the way. So all the diet culture stuff doesn't even get a look in. I appreciate it's not a diet culture book. Not every book about healing your relationship with food needs to be just about diet culture, but to not even get a mention. My fear on the downside is that people who have an unrealistic view of how much they should be eating will try to use these principles to eat that amount and continue to judge themselves. The other piece that doesn't get much of a mention in here is that he talks about how effective his program is, and there's research and all of this, but the program as he delivered it was in groups. And I was a big fan of groups, a massive proponent of groups here. I run groups myself. I do monthly groups and support meetings and all kinds of things like that. I'll pop some details below if you're interested in that. But it misses the support element of it. And I think trying to do this when you're trying to be more aware and you have a loud, critical voice in your head, I think this can be incredibly challenging to kind of do it by the book, if you like, on your own. But that's not to say that there is not a great deal of value in some of the exercises he puts out in this book. Now, please remember, these are my thoughts and they are going to be influenced by my biases. I don't have all the answers. I certainly don't have all the answers for each of you as an individual level. So you get to find out for yourself. I just want to offer you a couple of ways of looking at it, a couple of sides, because if you're anything like me, this is what would have happened. I would have found this book when I was struggling and I would have read it and it would have made sense to me. and I would have been like, I have found my answer. And I got really excited. And then when I started to struggle, I would have become really disheartened. And then it would probably go on the bookshelf as another thing that I tried and didn't work. So no one person has the answer for you with this, not even me. And Judson Brewer does keep coming back to letting your own experience and your own awareness allow you to draw your own conclusions too. So it's fairly balanced on the whole. Now here's the fun part. In 3 hours' time, I'm going to be meeting Stefanie Michele, my podcast co-host, and we're going to be discussing this book for a podcast episode. So if you're interested in checking that out, I'll link it to the end of the video and I'll also link it below. Steph has this habit of, I go in with a review sometimes or my ideas about something and she'll go, yeah, but, and then I realize there's a whole other way of looking at it. So she might even manage to completely change my mind. We'll see. So for a more in-depth analysis and another person's opinion, check out that episode. Thank you very much. See you on the next video.